to understand who everyone is and what you do. I'm Phillips, I'm a community pharmacist. And if you look at what's going on out there, half the country almost is taking statins, and now 20% of people on SSRIs, and we just seem so incredibly over-medicated. And much as I make my living like shoveling tablets into people, I've always thought there was a better way. And I've always been passionate about preventing public health rather than trying, it feels like the NHS is always sort of closing the door after the horse has bolted, if you see what I mean. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves to you.
Hi, I'm Digital Marketing Apprentice for Phillips at the Manor Pharmacy.
This is OC.
I'm Martin, I've known Graham since 1996. I'm just trying to help him out with a business plan for what he's going to talk about for the next 50 minutes or so.
Which way are you going then?
I'm Tam, I'm the administrator here. One of the administrators here.
I'm Emilia, I'm a physio here.
You're physio.
I'm Victoria, I'm also a physio. Rochelle, I'm also a physio. I'm Galen, I'm not a physio, I'm a patient coordinator.
Is that different from being an inpatient coordinator?
It's a posh word for reception.
This feels like Alcoholics Anonymous. I just said, I'm Julie and I've been addicted to sugar for a long time.
Jessica, I'm also a
Okay.
physio.
I'm going to close this because I've got a feeling that traffic noise is going to... Right. So, do you want to live to be 100?
Sorry?
Do you want to live to be 100?
No. Yes, if I'm healthy.
Yes, if I'm okay.
Right. So, your first instinct is of course I do, and then you start to think, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So just imagine this is a pub quiz. Quick fire answers. Is fasting healthy or unhealthy?
Healthy.
Everyone agreed? Okay. Is longevity mainly genetic, mainly lifestyle, or is it mainly luck?
Lifestyle.
All of them?
All of them, yeah.
Yeah, in equal balance?
Mainly lifestyle.
Mainly lifestyle? What percentage lifestyle?
Genetic.
Do you reckon?
75%. 70%?
70% lifestyle? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Are men designed to die younger than women?
Yes.
Yes? Consensus?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay, which matters more, diet or exercise?
Diet.
Okay. Does fat make you fat?
No.
Okay. Well-informed audience here. What makes us fat? Is it gluttony and sloth? So all we need to do is eat less and move more? Or is it something completely different?
No, this is not.
It's the wrong types of foods.
Okay.
Oh, wrong fats.
Okay. So it's not primarily fat that makes us fat. Okay. Is breakfast the most important meal of the day?
No.
Yes.
Yes, I'd say.
Yes, because you're
Okay.
fasting.
So 50-50 on that one? Okay.
Yes.
And how much sleep should we get?
8 hours.
4 hours.
Enough.
12 hours.
Enough, we're all different.
Right. So this presentation does carry it's got a health warning. It's got it may create cognitive dissonance. And if you look at this slide, I know it's a bit of a distance away, but you can see here the relationship between per capita cheese consumption and the number of people who died by becoming entangled in their bed sheets. You can make a graph of the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets, and you can compare that with the number of the amount of cheese consumption. You can see an almost perfect correlation.
Wow.
Right? The point is that this is correlation. It's not causation. So the fact that two things correlate with each other doesn't mean one causes the other. And
So what does it mean then?
well, it's just random.
Oh.
And a lot of the things that we've been taught over the years in terms of food and nutrition is exactly this. People have looked at the relationship between A and B and said that A causes B, and the question is, does it? So health span is that, lifespan is easy enough, that's how long you live. Health span is how long you live, but you live in good health. So I'd like to be the bloke on the left. His name's Charles Youngster, and he's actually a British dentist. And he describes, I think in his late 60s, early 70s, wanting to develop a beach body and he'd basically been a lazy, lazy lard ass most of his life. And I think he wanted to pick up young ladies, and there's all these pictures of him now over the internet on YouTube, draped in young women, and here he was 90-something as a bodybuilder. And you can kind of see, if you can live to 95 and life looks like that, bring it on, right? What we all dread, though, of course, is the guy on the right. We're slumped into our chair, bent double, in a residential home, slowly dying of dementia. So the question is, how can we live healthy for longer? Now, the science appears to be showing that the potential life expectancy for a human being at maximum would be about 120 years. But that presupposes A, you've got perfect genes, and B, that you live a perfect life, which of course none of us does. So most of us are on one of these curves. I'm 60, and most guys in my age have got at least one, if not two, long-term conditions. So we've been able to extend life, but we haven't been able to extend healthy life. And actually, more recently, what we've seen both in this country and in America is not only are people living less healthy lives, they're living shorter healthy lives. So that kind of dynamic that we've had since the start of the NHS, which is we're living longer and longer, what's happened is we're living longer in poor health, and now the poor health is actually overwhelming the benefits of healthcare. So you get to sort of my age, you start with one long-term condition, then another. So you're extending an unhealthy life, and in the end, you can look at a sort of miserable 10 years at the end. The question is, does it have to be like that? So does anyone know about the blue zones? So these are 5 very interesting, very specific areas of the world where women live lives of equal length. And all the Western diseases that we so much dread, the cancer, the type 2 diabetes, the hypertension, the dementia, basically aren't seen. And it's not really about healthcare, it's about lifestyle. So the reason these people live these incredibly long and very healthy lives into healthy old age isn't because they take lots of statins. It's got to do with the way that they lead their lives. And it's not whole countries, it's tiny parts of countries, including Loma Linda, which is the only blue zone area in America, in California. And that's a group of Seventh-day Adventists. So if you look at these different areas, you can't see an obvious connection. And it clearly isn't genetic because they haven't got a common gene pool. So the question is, what are the magic bullet points that confer this healthy longevity?
Yeah.
Now this has been extensively studied. And if you Google blue zones, you'll see lots of information. And the science, and there's a lot of science now behind this, shows that there's kind of 9 magic bullets. And if we can follow these 9 magic bullets, it'll give us a long and healthy life. Now the first one is natural movement. If you could have considered from a genetic point of view, we're somewhere between 1 million and 2 million years old genetically, right? 10,000 years ago, which in genetic evolutionary terms is a blink of an eyelid, we became farmers, right? And now we're up to what, the 4th industrial revolution? And you can sit on your chair and literally not move, and Amazon will bring everything, right? At least when I was a kid, you had to stand up to change the TV channel, right? We used to walk to local shops and bring, there isn't even a button on the TV to press anymore, right? And yet, we're notorious in this country for saying we haven't got any time to go to the gym or move. Now, the sort of movement I'm talking about, the sort of natural movement, is the sort of movement that a hunter-gatherer might have made. So we're kind of really cavemen living in a space age. So you think about a hunter-gatherer, they'd have been moving steadily most of the time, gathering, and every so often they'd have run like hell, either to kill something or avoid being killed, right? So if you think about the movement that a postman makes or a waitress, combined with the 400-metre hurdles every so often, that's what we're talking about. And that's one of the reasons why sitting for 23 hours a day on our backsides and then doing an hour of low-level cardio in the gym doesn't have as much benefit as we might think. And it's now being shown that prolonged sitting is actually as dangerous as smoking. So the first one is natural movement. The next one is having a purpose. Yeah. So the Japanese call it ikigai. So it's having a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, something that motivates you. Okay. The next is downshift. So there's quite a lot of evidence, for example, in societies where they have an afternoon siesta, there are lower levels of dementia. Okay. High levels of stress is high levels of cortisol. High levels of cortisol translates to high levels of sugar, and that increases your risk of diabetes and the entire metabolic syndrome that I'll come onto. So the ability to deal with stress and attenuate your stress by whatever means is really important. That's the downshifting. The next is how they eat. So it's what you eat and when you eat. So in these societies, people don't sort of binge eat. They tend to eat until they're comfortably full, and they do it slowly and purposefully and mindfully, right? I don't know about you, but I'm terrible. I gobble my food up like this. So if I'm in a sort of social setting, if there's somewhere where we can keep going for a second and third helping, I'll have eaten a big plate of food, I'll be chatting away, I won't even realise I've eaten it, I go back for a second and a third helping, and I'm stuffing it in without even experiencing it, right? And I've been out for occasionally really expensive meals, and I realise I come away, I haven't experienced the meal at all, because I haven't really thought about it. So they tend to eat mindfully and purposefully. They're very much of a plant slant diet. So although they do eat protein, they are omnivores, not vegetarians, the majority of them. They tend to eat limited amounts of organic protein, mainly pork actually, but it'll be a piece the size of the palm of your hand.
So did you say pork?
Yeah, it's very common in these societies. It's the most easily available.
It's a very unhealthy type of thing to put in there.
Yeah, well it's unhealthy if the animal's unhealthy, but if it's been organically reared and grass-fed, then there's a chalk and cheese difference. So actually, I know there's a big move against meat eating. If you think from an evolutionary point of view, if you make a moral choice that you want to be a vegetarian, I wouldn't argue with your choice. But we are actually designed genetically to be omnivores. There's no argument about that. That's the whole design. So they tend to eat organic food. They eat seasonal food because that's all that's available. Their diet is very much plant-based, so vegetables and beans, pulses, and limited amounts of animal protein. Interestingly, they all drink. Now they don't go out to the weekend and get slaughtered, right? But they will drink with their evening meal a couple of glasses of red wine, particularly red wine that's high in resveratrol. So that kind of red wine is full of polyphenols, antioxidants. It's really healthy. The one that they talk about in police zones is called Cannonau, which is Sardinian, but it's hard to get. But my go-to is Malbec. So unfortunately, vodka doesn't work. No, but Malbec, you can think about it as a health food, okay? A sense of belonging and a sense of connectedness, right? So, we get our old people, they get to a certain age and we dump them in a residential home. Whereas in these societies, people live in extended families, and as you get older, your social capital grows, right? Whereas in our society, your social capital is probably at the maximum the day before you retire. And on the day you retire, your social capital gets washed away. And we all know these people who apparently live fairly healthy lives, and then within a year of retiring, they're gone. Actually, the two most dangerous years of your life are the year you're born and the year you retire. So that's something to think about. And then they're very much in families. They live in collective groups. The grandparents and the great-grandparents have a huge role in bringing up the children and the grandchildren. So there's that sense of connectedness, a sense of society, and a sense of belonging. And the final one is about being in the right tribe. So if all your friends are couch potatoes, you never do any exercise, smoke too much and drink too much, you're likely to be in the same group. But if your friends are in a generally healthy group of people, and that sort of nudge theory, you tend to naturally do that. And I can see you guys obviously are like that. So being in the right tribe, in a tribe that is connected with health and movement and concern for healthcare is very, very important. And it turns out that if you follow these 9 precepts, you can add about 10 to 12 healthy years of life to most Western societies. Okay. So to me, if it's just a couple of hours, it's hardly worth it. But if you can add 10 to 12 vital years to your life expectancy, that's a worthwhile investment. So if we kind of look at what kills us today, and we compare it, for example, when the NHS first started over 100 years ago, over 70 years ago, overwhelmingly people used to die of infection, right? Now, the infection as a cause of death here is one of the tiny little blue bubbles there. What's killing us now in this country and in most westernised, industrialised society are cancer, dementia, type 2 diabetes, what we call non-communicable disease. So if you think about infection as communicable disease, this is non-communicable disease. And the evidence is this is overwhelmingly lifestyle, actually. So your life expectancy is probably 80% lifestyle and 20% genetic. And there's plenty of studies, both from twin studies and from animal studies, that show this. And this is really cutting edge science now. So the good news is if 80% of your healthy longevity is under your own control, you can influence your lifestyle and you can make a huge difference. And that's kind of my message, really. Other causes of death, though, that are increasingly common, again, this dynamic is only seen in industrialised, westernised societies, are autoimmune diseases. And pick the one that you know. Thyroid disease, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis. Simultaneous with this dynamic of increase of non-communicable disease, we've also seen a big increase in autoimmune disease. And this is illustrating it in a slightly different way. You may not be able to see the detail there, but that's an increase in, on the right-hand side, asthma, type 1 diabetes and Crohn's, for example. Now again, you may say, well, it's just because we're getting better at detecting it. Yes, we are, but that doesn't explain this dynamic. And again, this dynamic is seen in westernised, industrialised societies. But if you go to the Hazda tribes, for example, who are pretty much still live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, this dynamic doesn't exist at all. And you can't explain this in genetic terms because genetic changes, you think in terms of hundreds of thousands of years, and this has happened in a generation or two. Okay. So the question then becomes, is there a common cause? And if there is a common cause, can we find it and could we fix it? Anyone know about the microbiome? You still there? Okay. So in your gut, there are 2 to 3 kilograms of bugs, viruses, eukaryotes, fungi, etc. And if I said to you you've got 22,000 genes, you might think that's pretty impressive. But actually, we've actually got fewer genes than a fruit bat or an earthworm. And we don't actually have that many more genes than a banana. Exactly, right? So how come we're so successful? And the answer is these guys, right? So the genetic material in your gut outweighs the human genetic material by about 100 to 1. Or to put it another way, we're only about 1% human. And the genius of Homo sapiens, the human race, is the fact we've been able to marshal this genetic material to our advantage, right? And it's like if we're playing Snap, I'm playing with 1 card, pack of cards, and you're playing with 100. I'm never going to win. And you can mix and match, so your genetic material is relatively fixed, but these guys can be swapped and changed around depending on circumstances. Okay. So what are the benefits? Well, they help us with our metabolism, helps with our immune system, and they even help with mood. And it turns out that there's an area of the gut called the mesentery, and the vagal nerve goes all the way from the central nervous system through the spinal column into the mesentery. So in this area of the gut called the mesentery, you've actually got fronds of brain tissue. Okay. And if I said to you, everyone knows about serotonin, happy hormone, and when people are depressed, we give them SSRIs. If I told you that 95% of your serotonin isn't here, but it's in your gut, and it's generated by the bugs in your gut, you could kind of see that if you kill those bugs off, you're not going to be such a happy bunny. Make sense? And interestingly, it's not just mood, it's also autism. So if you look at the microbiome, the gut bacteria of autistic children, they have a characteristic, what we call a dysbiosis, a disruption. And they tend to be very fatty about what they eat. They tend to have other forms of autoimmune disease. And clearly this disruption to the microbiome affects their behaviour. And if you can correct the microbiome, you can, I'm not saying entirely, but you can make quite a big difference to autistic kids by feeding the right foods and regrowing the microbiome. To put it another way, the average hunter-gatherer tribe member has got 2,000 bugs in their gut. The average Westerner's got about 1,500. But if you're on the McDonald's diet, you probably haven't got too much going on there at all. So this is kind of illustrating it another way, right? So if you imagine the microbiome as an ecosystem in your gut, on the left-hand side we've got the tropical rainforest as we'd all want it to be, and on the right-hand side we've got what it looks like for many people. Okay. So the question is, how do we retain our tropical rainforest and not end up with this deforestation? So there's a fairly famous painting called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And the apocalypse I'm talking about is that one that leads to the deforestation in your gut. And without spending too much time on it, there are broadly 4 key areas that have a huge effect on your microbiome. And it starts at childbirth. So if you're born naturally, as the baby exits through the normal birth canal, it picks up the maternal microbiome. And interestingly, when women are pregnant, the microbiome changes and it goes much back to the childlike state. However, if you're born by caesarean section, you never get the benefit of this microbiome. And they've been able to show in studies now that there's a close correlation between areas of very high levels of elective caesarean and areas of high levels of metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes and overweight. For example, in Mexico, I think the Mexicans are among the fattest nation on earth. They also have very high levels of elective caesareans, so too push to push. And the latest study in Mexico is they get a maternal tampon, and when the baby's born, they wipe the eyes, the nose, the ears and the mouth of the baby to reseed the maternal microbiome, and it seems to be working. So number 1 is childbirth. The second is breastfeeding. And we all know breast is best, but among the other benefits and micronutrients of breast milk is there's 200 bacteria in there. Again, if you're not breastfeeding, you don't get the benefit. The third is antibiotics, and we're probably aware of the overuse of antibiotics. There's a increasing awareness of antibiotics. When I was trained, I really thought about the bugs in the gut as basically the enemy, and every so often one would get in the wrong place and you hit it very hard with an antibiotic. You didn't think too much about it. You didn't think about the damage you were doing. Occasional short-term courses of narrow-spectrum antibiotics don't do too much damage. But if you've had repeated courses of broad-spectrum antibiotics, it gives you effectively that deforestation of your microbiome. So that's bad news. And the last one is the McDonald's diet. So if you're doing all of these things, you're really asking for problems. Has anyone come across the concept of leaky gut? Does that mean anything? Yeah, heard of it. I think the best way to explain it is that if you think about skin on your body, it's got a variety of functions. But one of the most important functions, obviously, is it protects you from the external environment, right? So it keeps infection at bay. And if your skin is damaged because of psoriasis or eczema or even a scratch, and you're unlucky, you can get an infection. If you're very unlucky, you can get sepsis. And if you're very extremely unlucky, it can kill you, right? Exactly the same thing is true of the lining of the gut. So we kind of think about the food that's inside us, that we've eaten as inside us, but actually the food isn't really inside us. It's kind of in a hollow tube, and it exits stage left. And what determines how much the food we absorb is the lining of the gut. Okay. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, that's illustrating a healthy gut. So you've got nice tight junctions between the cells. The cement between the cells is fully intact, and the microvilli are doing what they should do, which is to help increase the surface area and help you increase your absorption of micronutrients. And the bad stuff doesn't get through. Okay. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see first of all the cement between the cells has broken down, and then the cells themselves are starting to break down. And that means that when you ingest the food complete with bugs and toxins, instead of that just exiting stage left as it should, it can actually absorb directly into the bloodstream. And that sets up natural immunity processes. It's probably the cause of a lot of the immune disease that we're talking about, the Crohn's, etc., but also probably explains quite a lot of problems with mental health. You know, when you've had a bad cold or a flu, you feel, it's not just that you feel physically ill, you feel depressed and miserable, don't you? And that's because the inflammation in the body also it gets into the brain, and you've got generalised inflammation. And then when you're ill, you can't really remember what it was like to be well, isn't it? And then once you're well, you can't really remember what being ill was like. If you look after the bugs in your gut, they'll look after the integrity of your gut lining, and that's why this is so important. With me so far? Okay. So that's one side of the story, but it's only part of the story. The other side of the story is about energy balance. Okay. Now, we've been sort of taught by the food industry that, you know, all calories are the same, and the way to keep slim and healthy is to eat less and move more. And that is where the cognitive dissonance comes in, because it's not true. For example, are you sitting there, when you go to sleep, no one dies in their sleep because they stop breathing and they stop thinking about it, right? No one dies in their sleep because their heart has stopped working, right? None of us are sitting there thinking, oh, I better control the pH of my blood to make it absolutely right, okay? All these systems are controlled by a whole load of complex mechanisms, which gives us what we call homeostasis. And homeostasis is common to all living organisms, even ancient single-celled organisms, which is they very tightly control their internal environment. Now, because human beings are pretty sophisticated, we have a whole load of control mechanisms, and we get those mechanisms in balance. And if your body's in its natural balance, then you automatically, without feeling hungry all the time, control your weight, control your blood pressure, and your body's natural control system decide when you take energy in, there are only two options: burn it or store it. Okay. The problem with the lifestyles and sort of Western lifestyle and what we eat is we've lost sight of that. So this isn't about calories. So I mean, I very rarely talk about calories in, calories out, otherwise known as psycho. Okay. It's actually about insulin. Now, insulin is a master hormone, and it has many functions, but if you think about the cascade of hormones, insulin dictates from the top how the cascade works. And insulin, among its many functions, has two really important ones. One is it reduces the amount of calories that the body consumes, so that's your basal metabolic rate. And the other one is it sets the body to store energy rather than burn it. Okay. So if you lead a lifestyle and have a diet that's permanently raising your insulin, you're permanently setting your body in energy storage mode. And that is the core, that is what leads to the type 2 diabetes and all the metabolic syndrome that I'll come on to. So without worrying too much about the complexity here, what I'm really trying to illustrate is you've got all these hormones in balance. And if the hormones are in balance, you'll naturally be a slim and healthy weight. And if they're not, you've got problems. And just by the same token, you know, animals in the wild, none of them are on a diet to get into their bikini, right? And again, you go to the hunter-gatherer tribes, they're not worried about their weight. They never count calories. They just live their lives normally and have a natural, healthy weight. And they're allowing their body control systems to do what they're designed to do. And my entire service is based on that concept. So, the body has two ways to store energy. So it's a bit like a hybrid car. You've got your battery and you've got your petrol engine. When the battery goes flat, the car doesn't grind to a halt. The petrol engine kicks in and off and you keep going, right? So the body's got these two different stores. There's the glycogen store and the fat store. Okay. The glycogen store is your short-term store, and your glycogen stores are mainly in the liver and in the muscle. And one of the reasons it's so important to maintain muscle mass is it gives you a big glycogen store, so it gives you a buffer. So if you've got good musculature, apart from other benefits, you're very unlikely to develop type 2 diabetes. Now the glycogen stores will only run the body's system for about 24 hours. Okay? But you know that we don't die of starvation after 24 hours, we all know that. We might feel like we're going to, but we don't. And the reason is we've got a second type of store, and that's the fat stores. And that's where we store the energy in the adipose tissue. Now, we only have a limited amount of adipose tissue. You can't, except for a small number of people, so that's fixed. Now, if you eat foods that raise your sugars, as a result of the sugars being raised, because the sugar is actually toxic, that kicks in your insulin and it sweeps the sugar out of the bloodstream. And the bloodstream at any one moment is only designed to have 1 spoonful of sugar in our entire 8 pints of blood. So it's a tiny amount, again, very, very tightly controlled. Okay. Raised sugar translates to raised insulin. Because if you don't remove the sugar rapidly from the body, you end up with toxicity. And you literally start to rot. And in fact, that is what happens in type 2 diabetes. We know that, with severe uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, people literally start to rot and they're hacking limbs off. That's the extent of it. So if you do things that raise your blood sugar, your insulin will kick in. It will first fill up your glycogen stores. And once your glycogen stores are full, it will then store the rest of your energy in the fat stores, right? A bit like your fridge and your freezer. You do your weekly shop, the stuff you're going to use quickly goes in the fridge, and the stuff that you're going to use over a period of time goes in the freezer. The trouble is that if your insulin is high all the time, your fat stores are never accessible. It's like locked away. So you imagine you're in the house, your fridge is now empty, you've got a freezer full of food, but it's padlocked and you can't access it, right? So you're feeling hungry all the time, and you're eating more and more. And that explains why people can be 6, 7, 8 stone overweight. They've got enough energy storage around here to probably run their system for a year, but they're permanently hungry, right? And that's because they're doing things that raise their insulin, and the insulin is continually forcing them to store energy and conserve energy. So far so good, or so far so bad, but that's only part of the problem. So remember I said that the adipose tissue, the fat stores are limited, right? So if you keep raising your sugars and your glycogen stores are full, you start to fill up your fat stores, okay? It's a bit like blowing these up, right? The more air you pump in, the more resistance you get, and eventually it's going to go pop. As the fat stores become fuller and fuller and fuller, because you're pumping more and more sugar into your system, and you're trying to sweep it away and store it as fat, the adipose stores become resistant, and that's insulin resistance. And that's what type 2 diabetes is. But coupled with that, you get inflammation as well. So these stores become resistant and inflamed, and that kind of inflammation is what then translates into the cardiovascular disease, possibly the dementia, and certainly some of the cancers. So you can kind of see how one thing flows into the system. Now, eventually your fat stores become so full that they are literally crammed full, just like the Japanese railway. Where they cram them in with a cattle prod, right? Eventually your carriage on the railway is so full you can't push any more people in, right? And they overflow back onto the platform. We get exactly the same process with type 2 diabetes. So at a certain point, you're still pumping the system full of sugar, your fat stores are full, the liver is generating the fat, it can no longer get rid of the fat and store it in the fat stores because they're full. Then the liver then becomes full of fat, and the pancreas becomes full of fat, and the pancreas starts to fail. And at that point, your very high insulin production can no longer be maintained, and it drops. And all this stored sugar has nowhere else to go. And the body then gets so distressed, it removes the sugar the only remaining way it can, and that's in the urine. Okay. And that's when overnight you suddenly develop type 2 diabetes. Okay. It comes on very suddenly, but actually this has been going on in the background for 5, 10 or 15 years. And if you can unpick this and reverse it, you can prevent the type 2 diabetes and you can reverse it. So it's the point where your liver becomes full of fat and your pancreas becomes full of fat, then your insulin starts to fail, and all of a sudden you can no longer hold back the tide of sugar. Make sense? Okay. But this permanently raised insulin isn't just involved in the type 2 diabetes, it has a whole cascade of issues, from polycystic ovarian syndrome. If any of you are aware of people with PCOS, they're usually young women, usually plump, but not always, who can't get pregnant. And it's because the raised insulin, actually raises their testosterone, and that inhibits ovulation. And it may seem strange that we treat PCOS with metformin, that you think of as a treatment for type 2 diabetes, and that's the connection. But it also drives cancer, it drives dementia, it drives hypertension. So one thing is causing this entire syndrome, which also means that if you can reverse the one thing, you can reverse the entire problem. Does that make sense? Yeah? So insulin resistance leads to all these different things, from cancer to psoriasis, even tinnitus. So let's talk a bit about diet now. We all know that the simple sugars are bad for us. You know, the full cream Coke, the icing on the cake, the jelly babies. You get a big sugar spike followed by a big insulin spike. And everyone knows that. So we think, well, we'll have the complex carbs because that gives us a slower and a lower rise. So when you look on the back of the pack, you say, oh, it's low in sugar, that's fine, it's got lots of carbs in. But actually that's not quite right. Carbs are starches. And starches are simply chains of glucose stuck together with an oxygen molecule. When you metabolise your starch, guess what? You end up with glucose. So what you think is healthy turns out not to be so healthy after all. But there are good carbs as well, so I'm not saying that all carbs are bad. These kind of carbs that I've illustrated here, particularly the ones that are higher in insoluble fibre, are the ones that are you can't absorb them and metabolise them, but your microbiome can. So if your diet looks more like this, you're being kind to the bugs in your gut, and in turn they'll be kind to you. Yeah, so let's kind of illustrate this with a typical meal. So, you know, how many people have cornflakes for breakfast, thinking it's healthy? Yeah, lots of people do. So a 30-gram portion of cornflakes for breakfast is almost the same as having 9 spoonfuls of sugar by the time you've metabolised it, right? Think about the previous slide where we've shown that the starches are metabolised to glucose. So a small portion of cornflakes, nearly 9 spoonfuls of sugar, but no one has 30 grams, everyone starts off with 60 grams, okay? And that assumes that they don't put sugar on their cornflakes and then wash it down with some fruit juice. So almost all of these sugars are a different degree of unhealthy. Then think about lunch, and you have some sandwiches with some rye bread. And again, in sugar terms, that's another 5, 10 or 15 spoonfuls of sugar. Then you might have like a salad for your evening meal with some boiled potatoes, another 10 or 20 spoonfuls of sugar. And of course, we like our luxury muesli in the morning with some raisins. Yeah? And I don't know about you, but I love an Indian takeaway with some basmati rice. Okay. So can you see that we're basically having type 2 diabetes for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks and evening meals? It doesn't have to be like this. You can make healthy alternative choices. I mean, I like a beer, right? And I like a real ale. But a pint of real ale is almost 10 spoonfuls of sugar, whereas a pint of lager is 2 spoonfuls of sugar. So most times, unless I'm really, you know, at a real ale pub and I really want that, I'll go for a lager. But if you look at the bottom there, you might not be able to see the detail, but a small glass of white wine has 10 times as much sugar as a large glass of red. Okay? So you can kind of see how you start to make food swaps, and you can both enjoy your meals and be healthy. So I'm a big, you know, if I go out for a meal now, if I really want a lager, I'll still have one. But, you know, 3 times out of 4 now, I'll have a glass of Malbec instead. Let me illustrate it another way. Have you got the sensor on, Sammy? You're wearing the sensor today? You haven't got it on today, okay. So, I don't know if you can see the detail, but what we supply is a sensor, okay? And it's a CGM, so it's a continual blood glucose monitor. I know Sammy's been wearing it on and off over the last few weeks. And that, it's a little disc, it's sort of like it's the size of a 10-pence piece. And it's got a tiny little hair-like probe that doesn't actually go into the bloodstream. It goes just below the surface of the skin. It's bathed in the tissue fluid, and it continually monitors your blood glucose. And then you use an app on your phone, and then that's uploaded to a server so I can see what's going on. Here's an illustration. So here's someone with type 2 diabetes. And they've had breakfast on 2 different days. Okay. On the first day, they had an omelette, and you can see very little change in their blood glucose. It went from, I think, 4.7 to 5.1, so that's negligible. The next day they had porridge, and it went from 5.2 to 9.7. Okay, that's well into the diabetic range. And I remember I was on holiday, we were stayed at a lovely hotel and had Bircher muesli. And I thought, oh, what the hell? And mine spiked up to 11. Way into diabetic. And I'm not diabetic or pre-diabetic, it just shows you. So, here's the nub of the problem, okay? It's not just the fattening carbs that cause the problem, it's whether you end up with a fatty liver, okay? So, there are people who put on weight but they never get the fatty liver and they don't get the problem. And there are people who are slim who do develop the fatty liver and get the problem. So it's not, you know, I talked about those correlations before. So weight, although it correlates with diabetes, that's not the cause. The cause is whether or not you develop the fatty liver. That's the core thing to worry about. Now, if you have fructose, which sounds innocent, it's fruit sugar, it sounds very innocent, doesn't it? Fructose can only be metabolised in the liver and goes straight to fatty liver disease. So I'm at the moment having a big Twitter row with Innocent Smoothies. This is their advertising and it says they haven't added anything. It's true. They've added nothing, it's what they've taken away. They've taken away the insoluble fibre, concentrated fruit sugar, and that goes, you know, it's do not pass go, do not collect £200, go straight to fatty liver disease. And so many of my clients are swigging large amounts of fruit juices thinking it's healthy. Now, I actually, a couple of years ago, with my pharmacy providers, I went to the Tory conference, and the two biggest stands were Philip Morris Tobacco at one end and Tate and Lyle Sugar at the other. I wonder why. This is Pulse magazine, it's a GP magazine, and there's a fairly famous media medic, Sarah Brewer, encouraging GPs and their staff to say that people with type 2 diabetes can happily drink fruit juice. Right? I doubt that she did that for free. And I tweeted her and the editor and I said, well, what's this about? So Sarah Brewer tweeted me back and said, I've got 2 degrees in nutrition, there's nothing you can tell me. And the editor of Pulse tweeted me back and said, there's no editorial control over the advertising. So I tweeted back and said, okay, so would you have accepted this then? Because this is where how cigarettes used to be advertised in the medical press. Same thing. So the food industry, and Big Sugar in particular, is doing exactly the same thing as the cigarette industry did 30, 40, 50 years ago. And this is the official guidance, right? This is the Eat Well plate that I'm supposed to tell people to use, right? Full of processed food, full of unhealthy carbs, and low in micronutrients. And guess who writes this guidance? The guidance is written by representatives of the food industry working with public health bodies. Complete conflicts of interest. It's literally putting the foxes in charge of the hen coop. And that's my version of an Eat Well plate. As you can see, not substantially based on carbs, but much more plant-based. Lots of healthy fats, particularly omega-3 fat, which is anti-inflammatory. Limited amounts of carbs, but the low and slow carbs. And a heavy emphasis on variety, so eating the rainbow. So let me just sort of illustrate this now. We're coming towards the end. Let me illustrate this with a couple of clients. So this is Beryl's story, and Beryl's her story's on my website. Beryl's in her mid-70s. She's about 20 kilos overweight. She's got raised blood pressure, but Beryl's principal problem is poor sleep. And she said to me she hasn't slept well since the menopause 20 years ago. And she'd been to see the GP, and the GP had put her on hormone replacement therapy, which is fair enough, but she hadn't got on with it, and she'd stopped. And she had these horrendous night sweats that woke her up in the early hours of every morning. And she had 20 years of poor sleep. Well, once we put the monitor on Beryl, we could immediately see that actually she had a hormone problem. It wasn't estrogen or progesterone, it was insulin. And because she had hyperinsulinemia, in other words, her insulin was permanently raised as a result of her diet, when she stopped eating, she'd have these terrible hypos. And the night sweats were due to hypos, right? And if you look either side of the red area where she's hypo, we've got her into the green area, right? So we're now, I mean, she's long finished the course. 6 months on, I would say. She's lost about 10 kilos. Her blood pressure's substantially improved. We've been able to halve her antihypertensive therapy. Her weight is down, as I've said, but she's now sleeping better than she's done in 20 years. All due to insulin. And here's an example of a young lady with polycystic ovarian syndrome. And we've got her completely in the green zone, as you can see. And then she had this spike one evening. It was 8:30 in the evening. She went up to 11.3. Anyone want to hazard a guess what the cause was?
Chocolate.
I thought it was a pizza, right? It was actually a piece of pineapple on a barbecue, right? The point is, you think you know, but you don't. So, just to come quickly to some answers now. You're right, 8 hours of sleep. In terms of exercise, I emphasise on two things. One is high intensity, and the other one is resistance exercise to build muscle. Almost everyone in this country is short on vitamin D, and I'm not a great one for supplements. I'm very much about healthy food and healthy lifestyle, but pretty much everyone could do with a vitamin D supplement. And then we talk about the Mediterranean diet, which you've probably heard of. The different ways to keep your insulin low and slow, right? So you're not spiking all the time, you're not doing this all the time. So your mood will be more consistent, your energy will be more consistent. You know that mid-afternoon energy jet where everyone's like this? You eliminate it. And I talk about the tyranny of food, right? So when I love my food, I'm a real foodie. I love cooking, I love eating, I love all of that. And my whole day used to be dominated by breakfast, lunch and dinner, right? And now I can choose. All those hunger pangs have gone now. So during weekdays, mostly I do what I call OMAD, one meal a day. So I have one big healthy meal in the middle of the day. The lean protein, lots of salad and lots of veg, and kind of eating the rainbow, and lots of insoluble fibre. And that will keep me going quite happily for 24 hours. It makes you healthier, it controls your insulin, you feel better. When you're busy, it's doesn't cause you the problems. My energy is consistent, my mood is consistent. Not everyone needs to do that, but it's one solution. Definitely avoid fructose. We've talked about the danger of fruit. We've talked about a glass of Malbec, so that's all good. Apple cider vinegar actually is a thing. It does turn out apple cider vinegar does help control your insulin. The key is to make your body able to burn fat, right? So just like your hybrid car, you've got get your body so it's easily able to adapt from burning sugar to burning fat, and it can change gear seamlessly. Whereas if you're continually burning sugar, you're like this all the time, and it eliminates it. We've talked about fibre, and I've also got a quite big thing around probiotics and psychobiotics. So the psychobiotics are the ones that feed the bacteria that make you feel happier, and the probiotics are the ones that keep your body and your metabolism in better check. What's really quite interesting here is we all think that the fat people are unhealthy and the slim people are healthy. Turns out that's not the case, right? What determines whether you get all this cardiometabolic disease, this metabolic syndrome, this type 2 diabetes, is actually whether you develop a fatty liver or not. And actually there are more slim people with a fatty liver than fat ones. So it comes back to this correlation and causation thing, right? We all know those guys who are really slim and really fit and keep healthy into their 50s, and then they have a heart attack or a stroke. And you think, how did that happen? Bill Clinton was a great example. He aced all his medicals, but someone did a very specific test on him, and he ended up having to do a triple bypass. The reason was, although he wasn't overweight, he was hyperinsulinemic. So he had hidden metabolic syndrome. And I think we've all forgotten this. This is what Hippocrates said. He was the kind of father of modern medicine. Our food should be our medicine, and our medicine should be our food. If you want to sort of look further into this, these are the people that I follow that you might find interesting. And then I think we've got a little bit of time for questions.
So you can have oranges, but not orange juice. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would generally say oranges are fairly high in fructose. So 1 or 2 oranges a week is fine. 2 or 3 oranges a day, I would say not. But certainly avoid the juices.
So vitamin C then is...
Yeah, there are other ways to get the vitamin C. Green veg, salad, nuts.
What about probiotics, Actimel? Is that a good thing?
That's interesting. So Actimel's a comp. Quite a lot of these probiotics have got a lot of sugar in. But what you've got to think is, first of all, what's the colonisation? Secondly, does it survive the acid environment of the gut? And in the case of Actimel, the answer is no. And then does it colonise the small intestine? So if you're interested in probiotics, the one that I recommend, particularly for IBS, is Simprove.
What is that?
It's a combination of different probiotics in a liquid format, and it does colonise the small intestine.
And what's that? You get that from a health food shop?
Or from us, yeah. So particularly for IBS, that's my recommendation. But there's people were saying earlier on, a lot of these things that are presented as health foods are anything but. So it's a source of fibre. What it doesn't tell you is it's a source of very little fibre indeed and tons of sugar.
Right. So you've mentioned psychobiotics.
Yeah. An example?
Example.
Yeah, so for my clients who are stressed and don't sleep very well and struggle with mood, I recommend potato starch, right? Not to be confused with potato flour, which is full of starch. Potato starch is full of insoluble fibre, and I normally say it's not particularly pleasant, but take it in a drink in whichever form you like about 90 minutes before bed. And it feeds the it's like fertiliser for the bifidobacteria.
Right.
It's the bifidobacteria that generate the serotonin.
And would you get that from eating potatoes?
You might, but the potato's the above the ground bit. This is from the root.
So how do you get that? How do you get potato starch?
Well, I can buy it from. You can buy it from. It's a powder.
Oh.
It's on Amazon for about £5-6 quid.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you ever have a blowout then? Think, oh, just gonna...
Oh, absolutely. I'm not perfect all the time. I try to be fairly good most of the time, and then every so often, yes. None of us are perfect. It's a kind of balance. So long as you know. Well, first of all, you can have a blowout with healthy food. It doesn't have to be unhealthy.
Do you eat chocolate?
Well, I eat a 95% organic green and blacks, and there's about 20 different versions of that, and that's really healthy. So, Cadbury's dairy milk, do you know, is 73% sugar. Yeah, it is. It is. It's designed. It's got the perfect balance of sugar and fat to be addictive. Pleasure.
Cadbury's Dairy Milk is the only chocolate that doesn't raise my blood sugar.
Yeah.
It does or doesn't?
Doesn't.
There you are.
Doesn't raise my blood sugar. Sweets do, but Cadbury's
Yeah.
Dairy Milk doesn't.
So it's
So
quite
because of the
individuals. So part of the point
It's very
of
personal.
yeah.
The green and black apparently you can eat as much as you like.
Well, I'm not saying as much as you like, but
You did.
When you work with it's very personal. So how you respond and how I respond could be very different. Because I think
Have you had your analysis yet?
yeah, at length. So
And?
things that really shocked me was one grape was like the equivalent
it's
of
the Murray
eating
that's
a bag of
amazing.
sweets. Yeah, I had one Murray mint and I went completely off the scale. Chocolate doesn't touch the sides, it doesn't raise my blood sugar. Rice, for me, this is personal, rice cakes are like eating a bag of sweets,
Yeah.
for me personally. Whereas oat cakes are fine. Wine, off the scale. Vodka, I don't have a blood sugar
So
response.
now that you're adapting to this, are you seeing a change in your mood, your...
Sounds like on a vodka and Cadbury's Dairy Milk diet. Doesn't sound like a perfect solution to me.
Then what should I say is it's very personal. So
It's very personal. No, it's general, but it's also your response is very personal. I've got a diabetic history in my family. I'm pre-diabetic anyway, so I've got to do this now before I become diabetic. So I'm going there.
as well.
So if you've got a family history of
So I had
diabetes,
gestational diabetes.
you have to do this
Yeah, you
now.
had gestational diabetes, you
And
had
I
to
had a
walk out.
caesarean baby as
Yeah.
well.
So
So he didn't get his
so-
bacteria.
it-
And
it-
I didn't breastfeed him, so he didn't get that either.
yeah. So your absolute Sam is right. It's very personal, and it's very counterintuitive. This is the microbiome that determines it. So when you wear that device, it's like you can look inside and see what's happening.
what about blood sugar tests? Is that a good thing to do? Like just to...
Well, just a one-off test doesn't tell you very much. What you want to know is what's happening over a period of time.
It's when you eat more than you do. So I
And
used
also,
to
if
take
you
my
change
bloods,
it, so I started
Yeah.
taking Simprove while I was on it, and Simprove, which is to improve your gut health, for me personally, but it's not for everyone, that also took my blood sugar lower, but that's because I think it was controlling what was
You
going
probably
on
improve your
in my
microbiome. Yeah.
microbiome. I don't.
Do you feel better on it?
My gut is a million times better on doing what I did with him and going on to Simprove. My gut, because I've lived, grown up with stomach aches all of my life.
So-
I have 0 stomach aches now.
And that's what I want to go with.
Apart
How do I get that? You let me know.
Apart from anxiety, the only thing is that, so I used to get food plus anxiety was big stomach aches.
Yeah.
Just anxiety getting stomach aches and just food getting stomach aches. And I couldn't work out what it was. Now I get pretty much 0 stomach aches, 0, because of getting off the sugar
And sugar.
and the probiotics. I mean, I still have some sugar, but I can tolerate it better now because I'm not toxic anymore. I think I was really toxic before.
Yeah.
So it's completely changed my life. And the only other thing I have to say that really shocked me is low blood sugar does not feel like low blood sugar. So I thought that when I felt really rubbish and low blood sugar, my reading was not reading low blood sugar. They're very different feelings. Because I tried to see what would happen on my blood sugar
So
being
what does
low.
low blood sugar feel like then?
Actually, for me, again, it's personal. I think low blood sugar is more of an anxiety sensation, whereas
Yeah,
the low blood sugar reading that you have is slightly different. That's more that you haven't eaten for a while. That's how you feel. You know, in the middle of the night when you wake up, I'm hungry in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah.
I'm hungry in the middle of the night, and my blood sugar is at its lowest in the middle of the
Yeah.
night. That's not. I don't wake up. That's not why I would wake up. It's not about food. That's normal that you drop your blood sugar at night, isn't it? I imagine.
It generally does come down, but what we aim for is instead of doing this all the time, we aim for that.
So I'm more stable with
And
all
then you'll
of
find that those dips just eliminate it.
Oh, mine used to be just
So if
like
I want to
that.
start, if I want to get probiotics, I can order those through you.
Yeah.
doing the pro.
Should I do that?
Yeah, that makes such a
You-
huge difference.
Just for the sake of everyone in the room, the actual course is an 8-week course.
Right.
So the first 2 weeks we just observe, we don't change anything, and we get you to monitor everything that what your objectives are. So people have different objectives, and then we monitor what you're eating and how it's affecting your sugars. So that's the first 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, we make the sort of big intervention, which is sit down with you and say, when we look back over 2 weeks, this is a problem, and those are fine. Because the whole idea here isn't to prohibit you from doing things, it's to enable you to do things, right? So it's finding alternatives. Instead of that I like, I'm going to do that I like just as much or maybe more.
Right.
So it's not, you can't do this and you can't have that, and you have to carry it out.
you
That'll
need
go.
to-
Just have food allergies as well.
Well, no, that's the point is that disappears. What you don't realise is that by coming off the sugar, you reduce your personal allergen loading, which
Yeah.
then therefore means you can then tolerate a wider range of healthy foods.
What about gluten? Can you tolerate? Is gluten a good thing? Because you didn't mention
Well-
it.
You're tolerant. I came off gluten. I came off gluten, sugar. I'm very boring. I was off gluten before I met you. I was
Yeah.
a bit on sugar. I've come off
Yeah.
sugar completely, apart from occasional blowout, which I have to have. You've got to have a blowout. But my tolerance of things now is much better. So if I have a bit of gluten, I don't have
So you
terrible
can
stomach
improve,
aches.
you can improve your resilience.
Yeah.
So I've just done a test a couple of weeks at King's College. I'm doing some work with Tim Spector, and Tim does lots of these studies. And he's the world's leading geneticist, and he's got all these identical twins. And I did a study, and I had to do an oral glucose tolerance test 2 days running, and that's basically 500 mils of fluid with 75 grams of sugar, right? And you normally go like this, so it's how high you go and how low you go. And what really surprised me, and I had to do 2 back-to-back as part of this study, and I was wearing 2 of his sensors and 1 of mine. I was like, the $1 million man. Hardly affected me, because I've become so much more metabolically resilient.
Healthy, yeah.
Yeah. So you can really, it's over 6 months, my resilience has improved so much. And that mid-afternoon energy where you feel like this, it's just gone now. And I've not eaten since this time yesterday. I'm not hungry, I'm fine.
Well, you're intermittent fasting
you're
anyway.
missing
You're intermittent fasting.
Yeah. So I do, there's lots of different approaches. There's the 5-2, there's the 16-8, there's lots of different ways of doing it. And what we do is we tailor it to the individual. So what's right for me, I'm not saying that's necessarily the way that you would want to go. To give you an idea, the full 8-week service, including the technology, is £995. We've just introduced it on our website, so because the website's new, we're doing like a website offer for £750. But if any of you guys want to do it, as I've done with Sammy, I'll do it with sort of friends and family rate, so it would be £500. If anyone wants to have a go at it.
I think if you want to change your life, I think it's really worth it. If you've got problems, So if you've got gut problems, it's the only thing, I've tried everything in the whole wide world, this is the only thing that has ever worked, is learning about my blood sugar response and then playing about with it for me. And then getting my blood sugar stable was the answer to getting rid of gut problems. So, for me, but it's a personal thing, really. But thank you very much, that was really interesting and insightful, and they all had to go off and see patients, it was nothing to do with your talk.
Yeah, of course.
Really,
Yeah.
Can I just ask very quickly, because
Yeah.
you said high fiber's good,
Yeah.
but then birch muesli, which I would have thought has high fibre,
Yeah.
isn't, because of the
So-
sugar content. So what kind of fibres?
So the ones that the supplements I recommend are inulin, not to be confused with insulin,
Right.
which is
But
chicory
all
root
these people in
powder.
the blue zones don't take supplements, do they? They're getting it naturally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are they eating?
Well, they're eating lots and lots of fibrous vegetables all the time, and
Right.
they're eating no processed food. There's no Pizza Hut, there's no McDonald's.
nothing, it's all a process for you.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line, I'm just taking
Yeah. If you want to talk in greater detail, then we can do that with pleasure.
And if you want to recommend it to our patients, feel free to, if they've got gut problems or they just want to sort out their blood sugar, they've got a family history of
I take a
diabetes,
leaflet.
Yeah.
or they want to
Yeah.
train, or they want to build bigger muscles, or whatever they want to do, it's relevant.
You took mine. Someone took my sheets.
Brilliant, thank you so much,
All right.
Graham, really, really appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.